Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about those top 25 results all around the country. A couple of teams that struggled, including Missouri and A&M, but kept their dreams alive. No two ways about that. And in a 12-team playoff, it's just about getting wins and moving forward at the end of the day. And before we jump into the fifth segment, just want to thank everyone that's watching. Always love to see a couple of people in the chat here, and definitely a very, very fun way for me to go about my day. Whenever I get to see a couple more people pop into that chat, kind of just makes me feel good. Just wanted to give a little appreciation to everyone that's watching live, as well as everyone that watches afterwards. It means the world to me, and I cannot express that enough. And I'll try to as many times as I possibly can throughout the rest of this year. But let's get into this Vanderbilt game. Weird one. One that, at face value, you see that score and you say, man, Vanderbilt played terrible football. They were all over the place. They did not play very well. They let a team get on them. And frankly, they probably did get a little bit look ahead point towards Texas, and maybe they can just get that win this upcoming weekend. We'll talk about that one later in the week. Going to be a very interesting one to break down. But at the end of the day, Diego Pavia was the whole offense for Vandy in this one. 17 for 31, 275, one touchdown on passing, 13 carries, 81 yards, one touchdown rushing. And the legend just continues to grow. He's one of my favorite players in the country, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. But this one would be easy to stress about if you're a Vanderbilt fan, or really if you're someone that just wants to watch this Vanderbilt run continue. But at the end of the day, Vanderbilt only had 9 possessions in this game. They scored on 5 of them. And you obviously have to turn more of those 3s into 7s, no two ways about that. But if you're really taking just anything away from this one, it's Ball State kind of just executed the game plan. Vanderbilt got the win despite of that. So I think it's one of those wins that's easy to get worried about. I wouldn't be overly worried if I was a Vanderbilt fan just overall. And then this one, man, this one was over very quickly. It was OU INT on the very first play, Oklahoma INT on the very first play of the game. South Carolina scored in 5 plays. South Carolina scoop and score, South Carolina pick 6. That is how this game opened, and it was over. Frankly, I flipped to another game because I said in my head, there was no way Oklahoma scoring 21 points in this game, and I was absolutely right. And frankly, I don't know if they're scoring 21 points the rest of the way, guys. They got Ole Miss. They got a number of teams that are going to just be terrorizing on that defensive line, and they did let go of their offensive coordinator, Seth Littrell, which was one of the big-time things coming out of this one that likely needed to happen. There are a couple of scheme issues with that team and a couple of things where you have tight ends blocking Kyle Kennard, which is insanity, but at the end of the day, probably a move that needed to happen. But with this offensive line, wide receiver, and quarterback situation, you'd be hard-pressed to find a play caller that can make that work. But at the end of the day, probably a move that needed to happen. South Carolina just continues to be one of the most dangerous teams in the SEC. They had 9 sacks in this game and 13 tackles for loss. They were all over the place and absolute issues for Oklahoma to deal with, and they're going to be issues for everyone to deal with, all the way down to Clemson at the end of the year. They're one of those teams that can run the table. They could lose a number of games, but they're really, really fun to watch, and I think this is just a precursor to the real year in 2025. But at the end of the day, we'll talk about that down the road. But moving on to this one, how do they keep losing these games? How does USC continuously lose these games? They're up by 14 points at halftime. They had scored on 4 of the final 5 drives in the first half. And then in the second half, they have an INT, missed field goal, and a turnover on downs, and they let Billy Edwards come all the way back for Maryland. It's absolutely insane what this USC team does at the end of games. And I think a lot of it is a Lincoln Riley problem. A lot of it's just a personnel issue. A lot of it is just a lot of things. And frankly, I know the leash is going to be very, very tight when he heads into 2025. I don't think he's getting fired. I think a lot of people are being a little bit wishful there. And overall, I think he made the right defensive hire. I do think D'Anton Lynn's going to make an effect on this team. Now, you got to be able to recruit to make that effect really be realized. But at the end of the day, I do think they're going to be better in 2025. But I can promise you, they lose a couple of these Big Ten games the way that they've lost these, there's no way he's in town for very long. So definitely a lot of questions around that USC program right now. And it's one of those games that you look up at the end of it and somehow USC comes out on the wrong side yet again. And I look forward. I don't know if there's a game that you feel overly confident in going forward other than the UCLA one at the end of the year. And they got a big win this past weekend. So a crazy, crazy year for USC, and one that probably should have stayed in the Pac-12 if this was going to be the product. But I'll leave it at that for the time being. And I'll move forward to a team that I just cannot get enough of right now. This Colorado team is so impressive. I didn't even pick them to win this game, and they came out, they just continue to prove me wrong, and I kind of love it. This team is so much fun to watch. They have so many playmakers all over the field. One of the best quarterbacks in the entire country in Shedeur Sanders, and he didn't even play great football. Or he played good football. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he did have 2 INTs in this game. They just won the game with defense. One of those things that I did not think they were going to be capable of doing. And Travis Hunter got hurt again in this game, only played 54 snaps all in the first half. So definitely something to watch going forward. But this Colorado team continues to answer the bell. There's no one on that schedule coming forward that they cannot beat. They got to go to Texas Tech. They got to play Utah. They got to play Oklahoma State. So there's definitely some issues that can be caused. No two ways about that. And I'm still wary of this team at the very least. But man, they're playing really good football. And right now, if you're taking your Coach of the Year pick, if you're not putting Deion Sanders or Kurt Cignetti in there, I don't know who you're picking, frankly. But moving forward to Baylor, Texas Tech is a missed moment for Texas Tech. They win this one, and they are in a very good spot in the Big 12, but now it feels like the season's kind of gone. And I don't want to say that. They only have 1 loss in this conference. They're playing fine football, and they absolutely can bounce back, especially with the craziness in this conference. But they got to go to Iowa State. They got to play Colorado. There's plenty of fights left for this team, and I think they missed a huge opportunity here. For Baylor, they went to work. They had 274 passing, 255 rushing, 5 scores on the ground, 3 through the air, or 3 on the ground, 5 through the air. Remarkable stuff. And it was one of those things that if Texas Tech can't stop Baylor offensively, it might be a long end of the year for them defensively. But overall, one of those things that Texas Tech had a grand moment to possibly take a little bit more control of this conference, and they left it on the table, and the Big 12 struck again, really more than anything else. Moving on to this game, because we got to talk about Aiden Childs. I think every single Michigan State fan around the globe was giddy in that second half, because that was the Aiden Childs that you have. He is somewhere in there. You just got to get it more consistently. He was making elite throw after elite throw, led scoring drives on every single drive in the second half. He was really incredible. In fact, I believe there was only 1 second half drive that didn't end in points, and it was Iowa throwing a pick. So very interesting stuff in the second half of this game, but a really bad loss for Iowa. No two ways about that. It's one of those that obviously I didn't think they were going to make a Big Ten title race, but this officially takes them out of it. Definitely still could go 9-3, 8-4, but a missed opportunity here that could get you spiraling just a little bit. It's one of those teams that felt like their offense was coming along last week, kind of reverts back to normal this week. So a very hard team to get a beat on. I still think they're moving in the right direction long term there, but definitely a missed opportunity to at least keep yourself in the fight. And then for Michigan State, you got a stretch of at Michigan, Indiana, at Illinois coming up, so you badly needed this win, especially if you wanted to get bowl eligible. So a huge win for them. If they beat Michigan next week, then it's going to be gangbusters for this team going forward. Everyone's going to be loving Michigan State going into 2025. I can promise you that. But I got to talk about this Florida team. They just are winning games. They're 3-1 in their last 4. The only loss coming in an overtime game at Tennessee. And this is a team that just continues to answer the bell in a game where didn't have Graham Mertz, didn't have Montrell Johnson. Jaden Baugh, did plenty in this game. 22 carries, 106 yards, 5 touchdowns on the ground. This guy is someone to watch going forward, a freshman running back that, if you're a Florida fan, you've known about this guy for quite some time. If you're a normal fan, kind of like myself, that's just following this stuff as much as he possibly can, this one came out a little bit out of left field. I knew about Jaden Baugh, don't get me wrong, but I didn't know he had this in him. He was absolutely remarkable in this one, and the rest of the season for Florida is very interesting. You have very tough games coming forward that I don't necessarily expect you to win by any means, but they're starting to coach some pretty good football over there. I don't know. It's one of those situations, especially with all of the talent, the young talent you have on that team with DJ Lagway and Eugene Wilson and Jaden Baugh and all of these guys, and LJ McCray on the defensive side. I don't know. It's going to be a very interesting decision. I don't think Billy Napier is keeping his job, especially with the way that I tend to believe the end of the season is going to go for Florida. But I don't know. It's one of those things where maybe they just turn it around and we come to the end of the year, they're 6-6 or 7-5, and Billy Napier's staying there for 2025. I wouldn't bet on that, but something to watch. And then for Kentucky, this one's got to feel like deja vu just a little bit. It's another year, super talented roster, really good defense, a transfer quarterback coming in that you just need to execute, and you missed the mark. And frankly, they are staring down the barrel of a 5-7 season now. So they got a lot to figure out over there just as a program overall. But this year is pretty much a wash, and one that it really felt like Kentucky had something, especially after that Georgia game. And then this one, I wanted to touch on this one just for a second here. First of all, look how far the Big 12's come. All the way from that Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield shootout that was absolutely ridiculous to a defensive-led Big Ten-esque game over there in Utah this past weekend. But this one was ugly for the vast majority of it. But the biggest story coming out of this one, more than anything else, is Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator for Utah, has stepped down from his position. Obviously, hoping it's nothing medical or family-related, hoping everything is all right off the field. There were some people that thought it was more of a mutual parting of ways. I'd be pretty surprised if that happened to Andy Ludwig mid-season, but what do I know? Maybe there's more information out there. But now, another challenge for Utah to face. A backup quarterback and now a new play caller. Not necessarily ideal by any means, but this is another year that just got away from Utah. Cam Rising gets injured and everything kind of falls apart. That's been the story for the past 4 years, really, for Utah, and it was again for this one. So you hate to see it for that kid, you hate to see it for this team, but TCU, on the other hand, huge win to put them in a place where they can absolutely make a bowl game this year. And although that's probably not what they wanted coming into this year, I think they'll take that right about now. So a huge win there, and one of those that I think you see just what Utah is without Cam Rising. It's a very, very different team. But overall, an incredible weekend, one of those that plenty of controversy, plenty of big-time wins, plenty of close wins and blowout wins. Georgia planting their flag in the SEC, Texas with a lot of questions to answer, a million things. And I promise you we will continue to get into it tomorrow. We'll get into the things that we've learned this year. We'll get into winners, losers, a little bit of a whip around to all the other games we haven't had a chance to get to. So plenty coming for you guys tomorrow. And then we got to get into week 9, which is absolutely incredible as well. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. Have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. We'll get you ready for the World Series over here. We'll get you ready for the NBA season coming up. A million different things happening in sports, and everything is covered over here at GSMC. So definitely come on over and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will be back tomorrow to probably talk a little bit more about officiating in college football.